Trigger warning, wee ones. This story may be upsetting and does contain crimes targeting children and of suicide, so listener discretion is advised. As snowdrops grew, signalling the start of spring, a terrible and shocking crime would be forever synonymous with a small town in Scotland and impact not only those there, but throughout the whole country. Hi, wee ones. It's just me, Dawn, today, so let's get started. On the 13th of March 1996, it was just the start of spring, which was signalled by snowdrops starting to appear near Stirling in the small town of Dunblane, which is about 32 miles or 52 kilometres northeast of Glasgow. Thomas Hamilton was outside of his home in Kent Road in Stirling at 8:15 a.m. scraping the ice off his van, despite the signs of spring. Once done, he got into his van and drove the 5 miles or 8 kilometres north to Dunblane. At around 9:30 a.m, Hamilton arrived at the grounds of Dunblane Primary School and parked his van in the car park there, near a telegraph pole or telephone pole. He then proceeded to cut the cables at the bottom of the pole with a set of pliers, cutting off telephones of nearby homes. Hamilton then walked across the car park, entered a door on the northwest side of the school and headed towards the gymnasium, carrying 4 legally owned handguns, including 2 9mm Browning pistols and 2 Smith & Wesson M19.357 Magnum revolvers, along with 743 cartridges of ammunition. At the same time, a class of 28 Primary 1 pupils, aged around 5 or 6, along with 3 staff members, were preparing for a physical education lesson in the gym. On the way towards the gym, Hamilton fired a couple of shots into the stage of the assembly hall and then the girls' toilets, before finally entering the gym. Hamilton was immediately confronted by a teacher, Eileen Harold, but he proceeded to rapidly shoot randomly around the gym before striking Eileen in the arm and chest as she attempted to protect herself. Eileen managed to stumble into a nearby store cupboard, along with several other children who were also struck and injured. Gwen Mayer, who was the teacher of the Primary 1 class, was shot and killed instantly. However, the third member of staff, Mary Blake, was able to make her way to the store cupboard, along with several children who were in front of her. In just the first few steps into the gym, Hamilton had fired 29 shots with one of the pistols, along with killing 1 pupil and injuring several others. Hamilton then fired 6 more shots as he moved along the east side of the gym, and fired another 8 shots towards the opposite end of the gym. He then headed towards the centre of the gym, and then shockingly fired 16 shots at point-blank range at a group of children who had been incapacitated by his previous shots. It was just then that a Primary 7 pupil aged around 11 or 12 was walking outside along the west side of the gym and heard loud bangs and shots and decided to look inside. He was immediately spotted by Hamilton, who proceeded to shoot in his direction, but thankfully he was only injured by flying glass from the window and was able to run away to safety. It was from there that Hamilton fired 24 shots in various directions before firing towards a window next to the fire exit at the southeast end of the gym, seemingly towards an adult who may have been walking along the playground at the time. Hamilton then opened the fire exit door and fired 4 more shots in the same direction outside. He then exited the gym briefly, where he fired towards the cloakroom of the library, where he struck and injured Grace Tweddle, who was another member of staff at the school. Catherine Gordon, who was teaching a Primary 7 class in a mobile classroom near the fire exit where Hamilton was standing, saw him fire his shots, so she immediately instructed her class to get down onto the floor, just before Hamilton fired 9 bullets into the classroom, striking books and equipment, with 1 bullet passing through a chair where only seconds earlier one of the pupils in her class had been sitting. Hamilton then headed back inside the gym, dropped the pistol he was using and took out one of the 2 revolvers he also had on him. He then placed the barrel of the gun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. This put an end to his reign of terror, where he had shot 32 people in just a few minutes, 16 of which were killed in the gym, including Gwen Mayer. Another died on the way to hospital, and 15 pupils, along with Eileen Harold, sustained gunshot wounds. Amongst those pupils at Dunblane Primary School who managed to escape the tragedy that day were Andy Murray and his brother Jamie, who you may know today as professional tennis players. Andy Murray later said that he was too young at the time to understand what was happening at his school that day, but that it did have an impact on him, especially as he knew Hamilton from having attended his youth groups, and his mother had given Hamilton lifts in her car. Andy Murray has said that he focused on playing tennis, which allowed him to deal with what had happened that terrible day in Dunblane. Hamilton's brutal and horrific actions were just the final act of someone whose entire life had been a complex web of hatred and lies. Complicit is a fantastic award-winning podcast docuseries hosted by Caitlin Boddy and Hilary Wadsworth, all about 29-year-old Lauren DeMolo, who mysteriously vanished without a trace on the 19th of June 2020. Follow the unexpected twists and turns as Caitlin and Hilary try to find out what really happened to Lauren. You can follow the investigation online at complicit-podcast.com or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Someone knows something. Someone is complicit. Hamilton's mother Agnes was born in 1931, but as the illegitimate daughter of a widow, Rachel Hamilton, which at the time would have been seen as a scandal, she was given away to relatives James and Catherine Hamilton, who had no children of their own. In 1950, when Agnes was 19, she met and fell in love with Thomas Watt, who was a bus driver, and they were soon married. 2 years later, their son, also called Thomas, was born. Unfortunately, 18 months later, Agnes's husband and the father of her child left her for another woman, so she returned to live with her adoptive parents, who unusually adopted her son Thomas as their own, making his mother his older sister instead. In 1974, when Thomas Hamilton was 19, he was asked to quietly resign from the Scouts after leading 2 incompetent camping trips to Aviemore in the Highlands. For one trip, Hamilton had failed to book a hostel, even though he told the parents of the boys otherwise, forcing the boys to spend a cold night in the back of a van. And for the other trip, Hamilton instructed the boys to dig snow holes, making them cold and tired. The boys' parents complained to the then Scout organiser in Stirling, Comrie Dukers, and Hamilton was dismissed. There was no hint of anything inappropriate or untoward, but merely that he was not competent as a leader. However, for Hamilton, he felt this was not the case, and he became angry and was convinced people, including Dukers, were spreading rumours he was a pervert, and this grievance would dominate the rest of his life. Hamilton decided to form his own independent boys' athletic clubs in school gyms, even mentioning his leadership and organisational role in the Scouts, albeit without stating that in fact his leadership and organisational skills had been lacking and he'd been asked to resign due to his thoughtlessness. In the early 1980s, there were serious and sustained attempts by the Central Regional Council to stop Hamilton from holding his boys' club meetings at schools in Dunblane. However, these were overturned by parents and the local government ombudsman for Scotland, Eric Gillett. Gillett felt contempt for the decision to close the youth club solely on the strength of rumours, saying that they were vague and should have been heavily discounted, and that Hamilton was being treated unfairly and unjustly. Hamilton also received help from a retired councillor for Stirling, Francis Saunders, who later said, "I never got the impression that he was concealing misconduct," but added, "He did have an ingratiating, almost oily manner, but I put that down to the buffetings he received." Saunders and many others believed Hamilton was innocent until proven guilty, which was further aided by his enthusiasm for getting boys into athletics and his convincing denials of any guilt. Hamilton was able to mostly see off the police and the bureaucrats. This included 4 Scottish police forces who investigated him after receiving numerous complaints and accusations, but each time detectives failed to find any case that would stand up in court. Hamilton managed to gain the support of others, many of whom believed that the accusations were just unsubstantiated gossip. Hamilton moved to a flat in Kent Road in 1983 with his adopted father James, who was in fact his adoptive grandfather, of course. In a strange turn of events, Hamilton's flat was directly beneath the flat belonging to Comrie Dukers. the same person who dismissed Hamilton from the Scouts almost a decade earlier. However, according to Dookers, he could not believe it when he saw Hamilton get out of the removal van when he first arrived, but he was surprised to find Hamilton was quite civil towards him. In 1984, David Vass, who was the Assistant Scout Commissioner for Stirling, was being asked on numerous social occasions about why Hamilton had left the Scouts, but David Vass was unable to give a full answer due to the fact he had not been involved with the Scouts at the time. However, this drew the attention of Hamilton, who decided to confront David Vass and arrived at his house carrying a brown paper bag. Hamilton then accused him of spreading rumours, but after 10 minutes he was told to leave, at which point Hamilton reached into the brown bag to turn off a tape recorder he had with him before leaving. Hamilton's strange behaviour was known to parents and members of the boys' clubs, but many thought he was just trying to give boys experiences he would have liked as a child. Although Hamilton had convinced himself that he was behaving properly, this was far from the truth. Hamilton was said to have favourites, and they would go off on camps together to Loch Lomond, only for the boy to be sworn to secrecy when they returned. According to parents, Hamilton had made the boys hand over their clothes and dress in baggy swimming trunks, with one later claiming that he made the boys rub suntan lotion on him. Hamilton had photographs of many bare-chested boys on the walls of his home, and even had collections of videos of boys running around his camp in Loch Lomond. In 1988, one of the parents handed in a dossier to the police, who followed this up with a raid of the Loch Lomond camp, but there were no prosecutions. A few years later, photography shops in nearby Stirling refused to develop pictures of the boys at the Loch Lomond camps, saying they were obscene, but they were deemed not obscene enough by the police for Hamilton to be prosecuted. Hamilton continued to live with his grandfather, or father, James, until 1992, when James walked out, seemingly due to claims of being humiliated and pushed around by Hamilton. That same year, Hamilton was banned from Fife council schools after concerns about films he was making of boys. Around this time, Hamilton also started to write letters to people he seemingly had grievances with or saw as enemies. In these letters, he stated they were jealous of his successful boys' clubs and were spreading rumours about him being a pervert. These letters continued until just before the killings in Dunblane. One of the recipients of the letters, David Vass, who was the Assistant Scout Commissioner for Stirling, described these letters as being utterly bewildering. In 1993, the Central Regional Council warned its teachers to inform their legal department before dealing with Hamilton. Also that year, a couple of police inquiries were made. A year later, in 1994, Hamilton would be cautioned by the police after he was caught behaving indecently in Edinburgh with a young man. Just a few months before Hamilton would carry out his terrible atrocity at Dunblane Primary School, he was denied membership of a local gun club after a couple of members who knew him mentioned that the club should have nothing to do with him. And only days before the killings, he posted copies of letters he had written throughout the years, addressed to parents in Dunblane, to council officials, to the Secretary of State for Scotland, and even to the Queen. The letters claimed that rumours regarding his behaviour had caused his business to fail, and his attempts to further organise boys' clubs were being subject to persecution by police and the Scout movement. The days following the tragedy at Dunblane Primary School were full of grief and sadness at the loss of so many lives. After it was discovered that the killings were carried out using handguns that were owned legally, a campaign began named for the flowers that were in bloom at the time of the shootings. The Snowdrop campaign urged people to sign a petition calling for a ban on the private ownership of handguns, as well as releasing a poster featuring a school blackboard with "Ban all handguns" written in chalk. The petition received over 750,000 signatures. Also, after the tragedy in Dunblane, Lord William Cullen chaired a public inquiry which recommended tighter controls on handgun ownership and added its weight on considering whether banning ownership of handguns outside of gun clubs would be in the public interest. The inquiry also recommended changes in school security and how those who work with people under 18 are vetted. In 1997, the Snowdrop campaign, along with public debate and recommendations from the inquiry, were successful in forcing the then Conservative government to pass the Firearm Amendment Act. This banned all handguns except .22 caliber single-shot weapons in England, Scotland and Wales, although it did not cover Northern Ireland. That same year, the law was further extended to ban .22 caliber handguns after a general election that year. Once the law was passed, around 160,000 handguns were surrendered to the police, and after one of the most successful campaigns in the history of the UK, the Snowdrop campaign was disbanded. In April 1996, a month after the tragedy, the gymnasium at Dunblane Primary School was demolished and replaced with a memorial garden. A few months later, a memorial service was held for the victims and was broadcast live on television. The following year, flowers such as Two Roses, Gwen Mayer and Innocence were developed in memory of the victims, and a snowdrop was named Sophie North in memory of one of the children killed. There is a story behind why the snowdrop was named after Sophie North. It came about after a resident of Dunblane found a snowdrop growing in her garden, and after hearing about what happened to Sophie, who was not only one of the victims of the Dunblane killings, but had also lost her mother to cancer just a couple of years prior, she decided to name the snowdrop after her. To mark the second anniversary of the massacre at Dunblane, a memorial garden was opened at Dunblane Cemetery, where Gwen Mayer and 12 of the children lie buried. It features a fountain with the names of those killed, and 3 stained glass windows in memory of the victims were placed in local churches. In 2001, a standing stone on a Caithness flagstone base was dedicated in Dunblane's cathedral, which featured quotations from poets and writers. People of Dunblane, or Scotland, or the whole of the United Kingdom will never forget the events that occurred that day when the lives of so many at Dunblane Primary School were taken. And that's the end. If you've enjoyed this episode and know just the person who'd also like it, please share it with them. Don't keep it to yourself.
Please also get in touch on social media if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. All social media and contact details are on our website, scottishmurders.com, as well as all the source material and photos related to this episode.
So that's it for this week. Come back next time for another episode of Scottish Murders. Join us there. Bye.
Scottish Murders is a production of Cluarantonn.